Well, my name is Bryan Parras. I also live in Houston, Texas. I was born there, and I like to look at this as a sort of generational problem with myself, and in a way that I think has happened with a lot of other folks. So my parents are originally from West Texas in the Permian Basin, where we have a lot of fracking right now, but it's also an old place that has been known for a lot of oil development, decades back. And my mom's parents, raised her there too. So when I look at a word like generational trauma, I think about the trauma that's been put on people for decades, for generations, and the impact that that has on the way they look at the planet and their own relationship to it. So not only are we impacting people's biology and chemistry, but we're also impacting their psychology. And I say that because when we moved to Houston, when my family moved to Houston and raised me and my brother there, if you talk to folks now, you'll see this really strange, sort of glorification of this industry that we just saw. And it's immense, it goes on for 40 miles from east side of Houston to Galveston Bay. And that has an impact on young children and their ability to even go beyond thinking about the planet as anything other than a commodity, anything other than something to be abused and used as a resource for their own sort of will. So that's one thing that I try to highlight and I try to bring up. And growing up in a city like Houston where, the dominant economic force is from industry, it's very difficult, to talk about these things in public.
Yeah, I know. And thank you for your courage. Could you please tell us what pressure have you feel as people struggling against this huge industry? What, if there is any human rights violation, please let us know now.
Well, absolutely. There's many other ways also that I think are important to highlight, especially here at the COP21 at the last meeting. And I also want to highlight that Texas, is the worst carbon dioxide emitter in the United States. And Harris County, where Houston resides, is the worst county in the United States. And so for me, I think there's a certain responsibility for us who live there to be vocal about these things. And we have to do that at the same time that we're, being poisoned and also criminalized. And so over the years, we have been targeted and prevented from doing our work. We've been followed, we've been surveyed, not only by government, but also corporations, private corporations. That was documented by, I think it was a reporter out of The Guardian, and they found that the FBI was going against their own rules to investigate organizers with folks in Houston, particularly working with tar sands blockade, who we were, working with very heavily because it was coming to Manchester, to Udit's community. I've been stopped, harassed. I've had the Coast Guard come to my house looking for me. And even here in France, my camera was confiscated at the airport. I don't know if that has anything to do with who I am. It may have been just a random thing, but these things tend to follow, people who do this work. And this summer, I had an opportunity to go to Peru and visit some communities who live along the Rio Tigre, And it's really, really scary and upsetting to know that so many people are being murdered and targeted for doing this work in other countries at the behest, sometimes of corporations and collusion with government. And it doesn't matter where I go, whether it's Peru, whether it's Canada, whether it's the Gulf Coast, California, there's always a company from Houston behind the spills, the leaks, the explosions. And so I feel like there's a need for really concentrated work there. And that's what we're trying to do, along with many other issues that we've faced in Houston. Texas is also one of the #1 states to be feeling the impacts of climate change, from sea level rise to flash floods to drought. Dallas just broke 3 records for the wettest month, wettest year, and I forget the third one. But the erratic weather is there. It's happening. Climate change is already happening there.
Bryan, we don't have much time, so I'm gonna make the last question. Please, could you tell us what kind of support do you think you need in order to keep fighting for the rights of nature in Houston?
I think there's still a lot of education that has to happen. We try and work with a lot of young folks, and we go into the high schools because, as I said, that relationship has been broken, in a lot of cities in the state, but particularly in these areas where you have heavy industrial presence, and that's bad for us in the future as well, because these are folks that have a lot of knowledge on how to identify the problems and how to address them properly. That's why we're all here today. All of the folks here have firsthand experience on what the problem is and a very good understanding of what the real solutions will look like. And so that's how everyone can help. There's a way for everyone to fit into this wherever you are. And that's what we're doing. We're learning so much every time I come to these gatherings and meeting the incredible people here.
Once again, thank you for the presentation. So and also just thank you for talking about how, especially when you talk about surveillance. So just want to think about it, when you talk about criminalization, of course it doesn't necessarily take the approach of legislation, for example. So I want to talk about there could be a lot of, or there are a lot of undocumented people in the area. So I'm wondering how different intersecting positions that people who are affected by the pollution from the industries work against them when it comes to opening up spaces for them to protest against the environmental pollution. I really wonder how all these things intersect. One, to to make the criminalization worse, but at the same time work to self-censor people who would be out protesting or out finding ways to stop the problems that are affecting the society.
Well, I think it's also important to remember that by the very nature of the makeup of these communities, particularly in a country like the United States, they are already criminalized. They are already under heavy surveillance. They already suffer from police brutality. They suffer from, all of the ills that go along with being in a big port, area. So prostitution, human trafficking, drug smuggling, all of these things overlap. And so when you take communities who are then trying to organize on these environmental issues, it becomes, doubly, triply more difficult to get involved. And certainly if they have no legal status, it becomes even more scary. And in Texas, right now, we are already imprisoning migration. These are refugees that are fleeing violence in El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Mexico, and they're being put in prisons. And in those prisons, the women and children, they're putting children in prisons, are then facing violence as well, sexual abuse, rape, physical abuse, and neglect, of the kids and their educational and their health, all of those things. So the people in these communities know that, and it is very, very hard, especially when, the company Valero, for example, was following our organizers to see which houses we were going to, taking photographs. It becomes very difficult.
I would like to thank all the activists that have spoken so far. We have learned so much from you. Criminalization is an important issue. It is something that is happening right now in France, because for the past weeks, France has used the fight against terrorism to forbid freedom of speech, freedom of mobilization, and the rights of the civil society during COP21. More than 300 people were arrested on Sunday during a gathering. More than 20 people cannot leave their homes and are surveilled. So maybe we should reflect upon this issue at the tribunal. How, within the framework of the rights of nature and ecocide, how can we think about the protection of the defenders of Mother Earth? It's not in the documents we work with. Maybe it could be in the future.
Well, just quickly, because I know that there are other folks, but you brought up food, and that's another issue, because a lot of these communities also have very little access to healthy food, and they're unable to grow healthy food in their yards because of the contamination. So these things overlap, all these intersections, and I think that's why we've chosen the framework of environmental justice, because we know that all of these things are interrelated, and it's important, for us to support all of those other issues as they come up.